Good morning, Red Patriots. Good morning. Good morning.
Welcome to the 376th consecutive Friday Assembly of the East Valley Red Friday Patriots. And welcome to our very, very temporary abode. Temporary meaning only this Friday. So a couple of weeks ago, I received communications from Scott Jackson, this American Legion post commander. And Scott advised that he had just became aware that this post 27 was scheduled to host an American Legion college leadership training program. And that was to begin today, August 14, and ending Sunday afternoon, August 16. And due to the nature of the rules associated with the college, it must be held in the dining hall. Well, Scott was extraordinarily apologetic about any potential disruption to our Red Friday program, and he and his staff have done everything possible to make the transition for today's assembly as painless as possible. And Scott has committed that a scheduling conflict like this will not happen again. Thank you, Scott Jackson. So, to the commander and to the Legion's crew assisting in this brief transition for today's program, we sincerely thank you. And to all of you folks in attendance today, we'll see you on the other side next Friday. We've had a few technical glitches because of having to transfer all of this equipment over here. And I think we'll be back to 100% totally norm next Friday. So to each of you present this morning, thank you for joining us to demonstrate your support for America's deployed warfighters. You know, in recent years, we've seen volumes upon volumes of movies and musical performances that have been generated in whole or in part with the aid of either computer-generated imagery or generative artificial intelligence tools. And in some of the productions, AI or computer-generated imagery is glaring. Then again, some is quite subtle. Only a short while ago, while searching for a patriotic themed song, I discovered an AI-generated song with a message that I felt was quite inspiring. And although the use of AI in this performance is glaring, the song's message is memorable. Let's listen to Never Forgotten. You know, as a teenager growing up in East Texas, my redneck cousin Huey drove down to his local mechanic in Tenaha to get his truck fixed. And unfortunately, the mechanic couldn't get to the repair job right away, so Huey decided to leave the truck there at the shop and walk home. Well, Huey's mom had asked him to pick up a few things on the way home, so as he started walking, he stopped at this hardware store and he got a 5-gallon bucket and a gallon of paint, and he had them put on the family's tab. Then he stopped at a poultry hatchery and he bought an adult goose and a couple of live broiler chickens. And as he was standing outside the hatchery, he realized he had a problem. He didn't have a clue how he was going to carry all this stuff home. And while he was standing there trying to figure out what to do, a little old lady approached him. And she said, "Excuse me, sir, can you tell me how to get to 1402 Mockingbird Lane?" Huey told the lady, "Well, I don't live that far from that farmhouse, and I would walk you there, but I'm having a hard time with all this stuff I need to carry. So the old lady looked down at all this stuff and she said, Sonny, why don't you put the can of paint in the bucket, carry the bucket with one hand, take those 2 chickens and put one under each arm, carry that goose with the other hand. Huey said, well, thank you very much, ma'am. And then he proceeded to walk the old lady toward her destination at Mockingbird Lane. Well, as they were walking towards the edge of town, Huey said, why don't we take a shortcut down this alley over here, and I'll have you at your destination in no time. Well, the little old lady looked him over and she said, I'm just a lonely old widow with no husband to defend me. How do I know when the 2 of us go down that alley that you're not going to have your way with me? Huey said, holy smokes, lady. I'm holding a bucket, a gallon of paint, 2 chickens, and a goose. How in the world can I take advantage of you simply because we walked down that alley? The old lady said, set the goose down, put the bucket over the top of him, set that paint can on top of the bucket, and I'll hold the chickens. You know, it's absolutely amazing how creative those little old ladies can be, isn't it? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to introduce our speaker for today's program, Diana Halstead. Diana is a military documentarian, historian, author, photographer, and digital artist. She spent the past several years preserving the personal stories of American veterans, with a particular interest in the human side of military service and the memories that cannot be found in official military records. What's rather remarkable is that this work began with someone who will readily admit she knew almost nothing about the military. Now, how she got there to here, I'll let Diana tell you herself. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Diana Halstead.
Thank you. Good morning. And welcome to the Barbed Wire Hotel. First, I want to thank Nancy for inviting me here today, and I want to thank every one of you for your service. When Nancy first invited me to speak, she asked me about my work preserving veteran stories and documenting their lives. And I have to admit, it still makes me smile. Because 6 years ago, if someone had told me someday I might be sitting in front of a room filled with veterans talking about military history, I would have laughed. Not because I didn't respect the military, I did. I always have. But I knew almost nothing about it. My grandfather was in World War I, my dad was in World War II, and I grew up during Vietnam. I had classmates who served, and I remember when Desert Shield became Desert Storm. You know what I thought? Well, that's a memorable name. Looking back, I cringe. Because I had no idea that those were what those words really meant to the people who were living them. 6 years ago, I thought a Huey was a duck. And dust-off was housework. A hobbit was a little person from Lord of the Rings, a movie I've never seen. And theaters were where you went to watch movies. And a hooch, well, I'll let you guys figure that out. Anyway, today those same words mean something entirely different to me. Today they mean courage, sacrifice, friendship, loss, duty, and service. and the incredible privilege I've had to know some remarkable men and women. I'm sorry, you guys just get me way too emotional. The truth is, my journey into this work was not planned. I didn't go looking for it. It found me. And when I look back now, I honestly believe that all along, God had been preparing me for this chapter my entire life. I just didn't know it. The plan actually began when I was about 5 years old. My mother sat my two sisters and me down and gave us one instruction: never ask your dad about the war. She told us that he had jumped from an airplane, broken all his ribs, been a prisoner of war, and survived by eating grass. And then she simply said, don't ask. So we didn't. Not once. My dad never talked about the war, not with us, not with anyone. He died in 1997, and with his death, let me see here. Oh, there we go. And with his death, the part of his life that shaped the rest of his life as a husband, as a father, a friend, almost all died with him. I didn't realize it then, but something priceless had just been lost. This is my dad, Staff Sergeant Henry Eugene Mall. Everyone called him Gene. In the military, they called him Hank. He wasn't famous. He wasn't a general. He wasn't someone whose name would ever appear in history books. He was simply one of millions of young Americans who raised their right hand. And when his country called, he answered. At that point in my life, I thought that was the end of his story. I had no idea it was the beginning of mine. For years, that was all I knew about my dad. My dad had been in the war. He had been a prisoner of war. And that we weren't supposed to talk about it. Life moved on. I discovered photography when I was about 10 years old. I still have my mom's Rolleiflex camera. In high school, I joined the yearbook staff and learned photography from a friend and learned how to develop film. Years later, I discovered I received another camera as a gift. Then I moved to Mexico. My friend that taught me about photography in high school sent me something I had never seen before, a pirated copy of Photoshop. There wasn't any YouTube back then. There weren't online classes. There wasn't anyone to teach me, so I taught myself. I wasn't the world's greatest photographer. In fact, I used to joke that National Geographic wasn't going to be calling me anytime soon. But I discovered something, that while my photographs weren't always spectacular, I could improve my photos and even learned how to restore old photos. I became fascinated with bringing damaged photographs back to life. Torn photos, water-damaged photos, faded photos, and photographs of families that were beyond saving. Eventually, museums started asking me to restore historical photos. Families trusted me with pictures that had been handed down for generations. At the time, I thought I was simply enjoying Photoshop. Looking back, I think God was teaching me patience. Teaching me to notice details, teaching me how to preserve history. I just didn't know why. Then another opportunity came along, and my son asked me if I would help him edit a short work video. I knew nothing about video editing, nothing. But I thought, well, if I can learn Photoshop, maybe I can learn this. It took about 6 hours to produce a video that was only about a minute long. But something happened. I fell in love with storytelling through video. Again, I thought I was simply learning a new skill. Looking back, God was preparing me for something bigger. Around that time, my sister told me that years earlier she had found something while cleaning out our parents' house. It was my dad's POW diary. It had survived 3 fires and 2 floods. I begged her to send it to me and have it preserved. There we go. 5 years later, in 2020, it finally arrived. Not in an archival box, not in a wrapped museum paper. It arrived inside a Chanel box. So inside the box, I opened it up, and in it was, you can see the Chanel box, and next to the Chanel box, you can see my dad's wartime log. There were also about 15 flattened cigarette wrappers. You know how when you smoke cigarettes, these things are expensive. When you smoke, after you finish smoking the cigarettes, you unwrap the wrapper, and there were about 15 of these. And this isn't one of my dad's. Those are safely stored in archival sleeves in a fireproof and waterproof safe. You learn. After surviving 3 fires and 2 floods, I think that was a wise choice. Besides, I wasn't about to spend $100 on a carton of cigarettes just so I could collect 15 wrappers to show you. But on the back of the wrappers, my dad wrote notes. He wrote poetry and thoughts. And while he was a prisoner of war, all while he was a prisoner of war, he didn't write because he thought someone would one day publish his words. He wasn't writing for history. He wasn't writing for his family, not even for himself. He was writing and putting words on paper simply to help himself survive another day. That's something I don't think many people understand. He never intended anyone to read what he wrote. Not me, not my sisters. Not even he would read these pages after the war. Those words were, Those words were private. Yet, 80 years later, those private words completely changed my life. I spent the next 2 years researching everything I could find about my dad and his military service. I found military records online. The National Archives in St. Louis had a 2-year backlog. I found mission reports, prisoner of war records, German records, which I translated, Red Cross records, and photographs of POW camps. And I even found 2 photographs of my dad while he was a prisoner of war. They were true needles in a haystack find. I learned he was a B-17 waist gunner. His airplane, the Laura Jane, and was shot down over Germany. Jane was the pilot's wife, and Laura was the crew member's girlfriend. I learned he spent 370 days as a prisoner of war. I learned so much, but then something happened. I realized I still didn't know my dad. The records told me where he served. The records told me when he was captured. They told me where he was imprisoned. And they told me when he was liberated. But the records could not tell me what he was thinking, what it felt like. How did it feel to jump from a burning airplane? What was going through his mind? What ran through his mind when he drifted toward enemy territory, knowing German soldiers were waiting below? What did it feel like to spend the first night behind barbed wire? What did it feel like to march through one of the coldest winters in Germany for 23 hours at a time? And what did he think as he walked and walked and walked? Knowing one of his crewmates would never finish that march and was buried along the side of the road. No military record could answer those questions. Only my dad could, and he was gone. That's when I realized something that has guided me every interview I've done. History tells us what happened. Veterans tell us what they were thinking, that went through their minds at pivotal moments, and what it felt like. And future generations deserve to know both. I had spent more than 2 years learning what happened to my dad. I was finished. I had researched my dad's military career. I had his records. I had his diary. I had his writings, his photographs. I had written his story. I remember thinking, finally, I'm done. I planned to take a break. No more military research, no more archives, no more computers. I thought just 6 months away from it all. My Calgon moment. That lasted a week. There was a little voice in the back of my mind that simply would not leave me alone. If my dad's story had almost disappeared, how many other stories were disappearing every single day? I couldn't stop thinking about it. Somewhere, a World War II veteran was dying. A Korean War veteran was dying. A Vietnam War veteran was dying. And with them, their entire lifetime of memories was disappearing. Their military records would remain. Their discharge papers would remain. Their medals and photographs might remain. But the human side, the stories, the laughter, the friendships, and the fear, the moments they could describe, those were disappearing forever. That's when I began understanding the difference between history and memory. History preserves events. People preserve experiences. History tells us that a battle took place. A veteran tells us what the air smelled like. History tells us when aircraft is shot down. A veteran tells us what went through his mind while he floated toward enemy territory. History tells us someone spent 370 days as a prisoner of war. A veteran tells us what it felt like to spend Christmas behind barbed wire. Military records can tell us where someone served. They can tell us their unit, their rank, their dates of service. They cannot tell us about the battles they fought. But they can tell us what it felt like to be 19 years old, far from home, wondering if you would ever see your family again. They cannot tell us what it felt like to hear a helicopter overhead. How many of you will ever forget the loud, rhythmic thumping of the Huey? They cannot tell us what it felt like to come home and walk through your front door, realizing you were no longer the same person who had left. Only a veteran can tell us that. And when that veteran is gone, that part of history is gone too. That was the moment I understood why I found my dad's diary. I wasn't just documenting military history, I was preserving the human side of military history. That doesn't end when the war ends. It continues when they come home. When they fall in love, they get married, raise children, build careers, wake up from nightmares. laugh with old friends at reunions, and sometimes spend a lifetime trying to explain experiences that simply can't be explained. That's when I realized if veterans were willing to trust me with their stories, I wanted to make sure those stories would never be lost. And that became my mission. Like I said, history tells us what happened. Veterans tell us what it felt like. Future generations deserve to know both. And that's when I stopped thinking about my dad's story and started thinking about every veteran whose story might disappear with them. I was willing to listen. And since then, I've had the privilege of sitting down with more than 100 American veterans. People often ask me, who's the most famous person I've interviewed? I usually disappoint them. Because famous isn't what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the veteran who quietly says, I wasn't a hero. I hear that almost every meeting. And they're serious. I wasn't a hero. My answer is always the same. I'm not interviewing heroes because someone gave them a medal. I'm interviewing heroes because they raised their right hand. Whether you think you were a hero really isn't important. Someone in your family already does. Then comes the second question. I really don't have much to tell. I smile every time. Because those are often the people who end up telling me the stories I never forget. Every veteran matters. Every veteran is a part of the greatest military on earth. Some veterans flew combat missions. Some built roads. Some repaired helicopters. Some worked behind desks. Every one of them raised their right hand. Some of them never left the United States. Every one of them became a part of a bigger, every one of them became part of something bigger than themselves. And every one of them has a story worth preserving. That's when I stop looking at the records and start listening to the people who lived them. Over the past few years, I've had the privilege of sitting down with veterans from World War II, Korea, Vietnam, Desert Storm, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Every one of them was different. Every one of them believed their story wasn't very important. Every one of them proved themselves wrong. I'd like you to meet a few of them. I'd like you to meet a few of them. I'd like you to meet Robert Beckham. Robert served in the United States Army during the Vietnam War. He was one of the first door gunners in Vietnam, flying with the 1st Cavalry Division during the Battle of Ia Drang. If you've ever seen the movie We Were Soldiers, you've seen Hollywood's version of that battle. I've had the privilege of talking with one of the men who was actually there. History tells us Ia Drang was one of the first major battles of the Vietnam War. Robert told us what it felt like. I'd like you to meet Mike Barinholtz. Mike wanted to join the Air Force. They were not accepting recruits, so he joined the Navy. He became an aviation machinist, maintaining Navy aircraft in Jacksonville, Florida. Later, because he knew how to type, he was moved into operations where he prepared daily flight schedules to many people. Well, to many people that might sound pretty ordinary, and to Mike it didn't seem that way. He told me that the Navy was probably the best thing that could have happened to him. When he left the service, he used the GI Bill to earn his college degree. One day, a friend walked up to him and said, I interviewed for a job I couldn't get because I didn't have a college degree. You ought to apply. So he did. That job was with the United States Secret Service. He had just taken his oath when President Kennedy was assassinated. He went on to be Secret Service to Johnson and Nixon. And he also helped protect Pope Paul VI. When Mike looked back over his life, he said something I've never forgotten. I don't think of things as incidental consequences. I think this is what is supposed to happen. I love that. Because none of us knows where raising our right hand will eventually lead. I'd like you to meet Raymond Gregg. Raymond grew up wanting one thing. He wanted to become a better Marine than his father. He wanted his future children to be proud of him. He served in Vietnam. He came home, but in many ways, Vietnam came home with him. Years later, during a heartbreaking family tragedy, Raymond was convicted of murder. Today, he is still in prison. Some people have asked me, why would I interview someone like that? Because before any of that happened, Raymond raised his right hand. He served his country honorably. His family deserves to know that part of his story. His grandchildren deserve to hear his voice. His story reminds us that sometimes the hardest battle begins after you come home. I'd like you to meet Michael Thompson. Many people recognize the name Colonel Nick Rowe. He escaped after more than 5 years as a prisoner of war. It's one of the greatest survival stories of the Vietnam War, but I wasn't looking for Colonel Rowe. I wanted to meet the crew chief who reached down and pulled him into the helicopter. Michael described seeing a man in black pajamas standing in a free fire zone waving a mosquito net. No one knew if it was a trap. Rowe climbed on board and started praying. Michael learned he had just rescued one of America's most famous prisoners of war. When I asked Michael about Vietnam, he told me that was the best day of his entire tour. History remembers Colonel Rowe. I'll always remember the crew chief who reached down with his hand. Finally, I'd like you to meet Dan Crockett. Dan wanted to serve in the Air Force so badly that he went through basic training twice. After the second time, someone quietly pulled him inside and said, Dan, not everyone is cut out to be in the Air Force, but we appreciate your interest. Some people hear that story and think, well, that's not much of a military history. I hear something entirely different. I hear a young man who wanted to serve our country so badly, he was willing to do whatever was asked of him twice. Last year, I gave Dan an American flag teddy bear. He cried, not because of the bear, but because someone believed his service mattered. I think it does. Service isn't measured by how long you wore the uniform. Sometimes it's measured by how badly you wanted to wear it. Now I look around the room. I know some of you may be thinking my story isn't as interesting as Robert's, or I didn't rescue anyone. I never became a Secret Service agent, or I never served in Vietnam, but that's exactly my point. This isn't about Robert. This isn't about Raymond or Michael or Dan. It's about of the veterans sitting somewhere in this room quietly thinking, maybe my story doesn't matter. I'm here to tell you it does, because someday your great-grandson's great-grandson isn't going to be looking for Robert Beckham's story. He's going to be looking for yours. And that's why I believe every veteran needs to have one more conversation. These 5 veterans each served in different situations, different branches, different places, and they all had one thing in common. None of them believed their story mattered. They were wrong. That's why I wrote my newest book. Not because I expected everyone to sit down in front of my camera. In fact, I don't. The book is called Preserving a Legacy Preserving a Legacy from the Barbed Wire Hotel. The Conversation. It's not really a book. It's a conversation waiting to happen. It's the same questions I ask veterans in their interview. First question, where did you grow up? Tell me about your military service, about coming home. Because history books can tell us where you served. Only you can tell us what it felt like. But there's an important part. Please don't wait for me. Your story doesn't become more valuable because I record it. It becomes more valuable because it survives. Have your husband ask the questions. Have your wife ask the questions. Have your children or grandchildren ask the questions. Or turn on your cell phone and hit the record button for video. Answer one question at a time. Where did you grow up? Maybe you're driving somewhere and suddenly remember something you haven't thought about in 50 years. Maybe you remember the dust-off helicopter that came in around midnight carrying wounded soldiers, and one of them was your best friend. Pull over, record it. Leave yourself a voicemail, write it down. I don't care if you tell me, I don't care if you tell your family, I don't care if you tell your pastor, I don't care if you tell Channel 2 News. Just tell it. Because someday somebody is going to want to hear it. Last week, one of my veteran friends told me he needs to sit down with his father-in-law. His father-in-law served 2 tours in Vietnam with the Marines for years. He's told stories around the dinner table. Now his health is failing. Suddenly, everyone realizes those stories could disappear forever. The truth is, every one of us knows someone whose stories died with them. We all wish we could ask one more question, but we can't. Not one more year. We can't ask. So don't wait. Not until retirement, not until you're ready. Start today. Before I leave today, I have one favor to ask. Promise me something. Promise me that you won't let your story disappear. Whether you tell me or your family, whether you record it on your phone, just promise me that your great-grandson's great-grandson will have the chance to know his hero. That's all I'm asking. My dad's story was almost lost, and I don't want that to happen to another veteran, not on my watch. And now I'm asking you, don't let it happen on yours. Welcome to the Barbed Wire Hotel.
Diana, may I ask you to stand?
Oh.
I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you to the Order of the Red. And this particular certificate of appreciation states, we hereby extol and commend Diana Halstead for her unwavering dedication to preserving the voices of American veterans and her support of the East Valley Red Friday Patriots.
Thank you so much.
Good? Good? Superb.
Thank you
Superb.
so much.
I do have a few announcements, if I may. I want to remind you that the Patriots Ball is scheduled for October 17. Patrick McNeil, raise your hand. Patrick is right back here. If anyone would like to discuss the ball and get some further detail relevant to what the ball actually consists of, the cost to attend, etc., please get with Patrick after we dismiss. I will tell you that we participated in the ball, several of us here last year. It was absolutely fabulous, and I strongly encourage that you consider attending. Just another reminder that we've scheduled guest speakers to join us for the coming weeks of August and September. So I encourage you to come out each Friday whenever possible, support our guest speakers. I also want to remind you that next Friday, we are back to normal. And we will meet in our familiar dining hall, and these TVs and all of our sound system will be fully operative. Is Philip Todd here? Philip, I didn't see you sneak in. Did you have something that you wanted to say? If you would, Nancy, would you get him a microphone?
Yes, I would like to say something, and you're involved in this.
Start documenting.
I also would like to have your lovely wife come up here. For some of you that have been to our home, you probably would not expect me to have to go to Hobby Lobby. But I have to do what my wife wants me to do. And in Hobby Lobby, there is a section for veterans. And there's interesting stuff that you can find there. And I found something yesterday that I would like to present to the people that probably understand it more than anybody else. And there it is. Now, as I first joined the military, I had to learn what the different ranks were. And all of you have experienced how some people get promoted and some people do not. And, you know, time and grade is one thing. Doing something heroic is something else. But there was a lady in East Texas who figured out how to do it.
A veteran lives here with his commander-in-chief. Thank you, my friend. I appreciate that. To our first-time guests, to Diana, who traveled here to 2,500 miles. I think it's 2,500 miles. Thank you for joining us today, and believe me, we sincerely appreciate your sharing in our camaraderie and supporting our mission. Please know that you're always welcome. Please know that you're always welcome to join us at Red Friday. And as a final reminder, let us not overlook the importance of this Red Friday mission to keep our deployed service members in our thoughts and prayers, and continue to demonstrate our support for these fine men and women. And please, please, keep in mind, it is patriotism that unites us. Have a great weekend.